What happens when the person trusted to guide your soul becomes the one leading you toward death? In small towns across America, churches are meant to feel safe, a place where families pray together, a place where secrets are confessed and forgiveness is promised. But in Independence, Missouri, one church was hiding something far darker. Randy Stone believed he had built a good life. He was respected, successful, devoted to his faith, a loving husband, a trusted member of New Hope Baptist Church. And standing beside him through it all was his pastor and close friend, David Love. To the church community, David Love was charismatic, confident, the kind of man people turned to for guidance during the darkest moments of their lives. But behind the sermons, behind the handshakes, behind the image of a perfect Christian family, a secret affair had already been unfolding for nearly a decade. Handwritten letters, late-night phone reenactments, shadow moving through the empty church hallway. For 10 years, Randy Stone had no idea that the two people he trusted most were betraying him in secret: his wife, Teresa Stone, and his pastor. But this story wouldn't end with heartbreak. It would end with bloodshed. On March 31, 2010, Randy Stone was found dead inside his insurance office, shot with his own handgun. At first, detectives believed it was a robbery gone wrong. But then, they found something in the trash, a letter, not from a killer hiding in the shadows, but from a pastor. That single discovery would unravel a nightmare built on manipulation, lust, greed, and betrayal hidden beneath the image of faith. Because investigators soon realized this wasn't just an affair. This was a calculated deception, years in the making. And the deeper they looked into Pastor David Love, the darker the truth became. How do you hide a secret relationship for 10 years from the man sitting beside you every single day? How does a trusted pastor convince an entire church that he's a man of God while secretly destroying the life of his closest friend? And was this murder truly about love, or about the $800,000 waiting after Randy Stone's death? Today, we uncover the shocking pastor affair and murder that rocked Missouri. Because sometimes, evil doesn't hide in darkness. Sometimes it stands behind a pulpit. In Independence, Missouri, life moved slowly. The kind of place where people knew your name, knew your family, and knew which church you belonged to. At the center of it all stood New Hope Baptist Church. Not just a building. For years, New Hope Baptist was seen as a place of stability, a place where families gathered every Sunday, where problems were prayed away, and where trust wasn't just expected, it was assumed. And among those families was Randy Stone. Randy wasn't a man who sought attention. He was steady, respected, known in his community as a hard-working businessman and a devoted husband. To those who knew him, Randy Stone represented everything a stable life should be. A man who believed in responsibility, in the family, and in faith. And like many in the community, Randy trusted his church completely. But inside New Hope Baptist Church, there was one figure who held even greater influence than the building itself: Pastor David Love. To the outside world, he was everything a pastor was supposed to be: charismatic, confident, commanding attention with every word he spoke from the pulpit. When David Love preached, people listened. When he prayed, people believed. And when he offered guidance, people followed. He wasn't just a religious leader. He was a friend of the Stone family, a trusted voice in their marriage, a man welcomed into their most personal moments. And Teresa Stone, Randy's wife, was no stranger to that trust. To the community, she appeared as the picture of a faithful partner, a woman deeply rooted in church life, someone who belonged to the same world of devotion and belief. From the outside, everything looked perfect: faith, marriage, community, a life built on trust and protected by belief. But perfection is often just a surface. And beneath that surface, something had already begun to shift. Because behind the smiles and sermons, a secret relationship had already been unfolding for years. And no one in Independence, Missouri had any idea what was coming next. At first, it wasn't a scandal. It wasn't suspicion. It wasn't even a whisper. It was something far more dangerous, something invisible. A connection that no one questioned because it was hidden in plain sight. A place like New Hope Baptist Church, trust wasn't just personal, it was spiritual. So when Pastor David Love spoke with kindness, when he offered counsel to families, when he stepped into private struggles, no one thought to ask why. But somewhere along those quiet moments, between prayer requests and private conversations, lines began to blur. What started as guidance became familiar. What became familiarity turned into secrecy. And secrecy became something else entirely. For nearly 10 years, Teresa Stone and Pastor David Love maintained a relationship that no one outside the church ever suspected. Not Randy, not the congregation, not even those closest to them. Because betrayal doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes, it learns how to breathe quietly in normal life. Randy Stone continued to trust the people closest to him. He trusted his wife. He trusted his pastor. And most of all, he trusted the belief that faith protected what mattered most. But trust can be carefully engineered. Not just secrecy, but influence, control, the quiet ability to shape perception without ever raising suspicion. Because David Love wasn't just present in Randy Stone's life, he was trusted within it. A friend, a spiritual guide, a man who knew when to speak and when to stay silent. And that silence, it may have been the most powerful tool he had. It became protected, guarded, and carefully maintained in the spaces where no one would look. But every secret has weight, and every hidden truth eventually demands a cost. And in Independence, Missouri, that cost was about to surface in a way no one could have imagined. Because what began as quiet betrayal was no longer just about secrecy. It was about what someone was willing to do to keep it from ever coming to light. March 31st, 2010, a date that for most people in Independence, Missouri, began like any other, normal, predictable, unremarkable. But for Randy Stone, it would be his last. Randy arrived at his insurance office the same way he always did. On time, focused, unaware. There was no panic, no warning, no sign that anything in his world had shifted. Because in his mind, there was no reason to believe it had. But somewhere, far beyond that office door, a different story was already in motion. One was built quietly, patiently, carefully. A story that Randy had never been told. At first, investigators believed what many crime scenes suggest: a robbery gone wrong, a break-in, a sudden confrontation, a moment of chaos that ended in tragedy. But something about the scene didn't fit. Nothing felt random, nothing felt forced, it felt placed. There was no clear struggle, no obvious sign of panic. And most importantly, no real evidence that a stranger had ever been there at all. And then investigators found what changed everything. In the trash, hidden among discarded paper and routine waste, was a letter. Not just any letter, a personal message, intimate, emotional, and addressed to the very center of the investigation that no one had yet fully understood. Because this wasn't just about what happened inside that office. It was about what had been happening long before Randy ever walked through that door. 10 years of hidden connection, 10 years of private conversations, 10 years of trust being quietly redirected away from him. And suddenly, what looked like a sudden act of violence began to feel like something else entirely, something slower, something more deliberate, something that had been building inside the life Randy thought was secure. Because the most disturbing realization wasn't that Randy Stone had been killed. It was that the people closest to him had already been connected long before his death. And as investigators pulled on that thread, they began to uncover a truth far more unsettling than the crime itself. This wasn't a sudden break in trust. It was the final stage of something that had already been broken for years. And once detectives understood that, the question was no longer just who pulled the trigger. It was how many people had been standing in the shadows long before it happened. In every investigation, there is a moment where everything shifts. Not because of a confession, not because of a witness, but because of a piece of paper. It came from the trash, folded, discarded, almost forgotten. But what was written on it was anything but ordinary. At first, detectives didn't understand what they were looking at. Just another document in a murder scene, until they read it. The letter wasn't random, it wasn't financial, it wasn't business, it was personal, deeply personal. And it had been written by someone who should have never been part of this story in this way. Pastor David Love. The content of the letter revealed what investigators had only begun to suspect. A relationship hidden in plain sight. A connection that spanned years. A connection that didn't just cross emotional boundaries, but erased them. And suddenly, the case changed. What was once treated as a possible robbery was no longer random. It was personal, structured, intentional. Because this letter didn't just confirm an affair, it confirmed proximity, access, trust, and something far more dangerous: motive. For investigators, the realization was devastating. Randy Stone's final days had not been surrounded by strangers. They had been surrounded by people he believed he knew, people he trusted, people he welcomed, people he never questioned. And in that silence, the truth became impossible to ignore. The story was no longer about a man who died in a robbery gone wrong. It was about a life quietly rewritten behind his back. Because the letter didn't just reveal what was happening. It revealed who had been allowed to get close enough to make it happen. And from that moment forward, investigators were no longer looking for a stranger. They were looking inside a church. As investigators dug deeper into the lives of Teresa Stone and Pastor David Love, the affair was no longer the most disturbing part of the story. What frightened them now was the possibility that this relationship had evolved into something far more calculated. Because hidden beneath the emotional betrayal was another layer: money. A life insurance policy is reportedly worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. Suddenly, investigators began asking a chilling question. Was Randy Stone murdered because of love, or because his death benefited the people closest to him? The deeper authorities looked into David Love's role in Randy's life. The more unsettling the dynamic became, because David Love wasn't an outsider. He wasn't someone forcing his way into Randy's world. He had already been invited inside. He knew Randy's routines, his marriage, his struggles, his trust. And trust, it can become a dangerous form of power when placed in the wrong hands. Investigators would later suggest that David Love held influence over nearly every emotional corner of the Stone family's life. Not through violence, not through threats, but through authority, spiritual authority. Inside churches, pastors are often seen as moral anchors. People confess to them, depend on them, believe them without hesitation. And that level of access can create a kind of control that few people ever question. Meanwhile, Randy Stone continued living inside a reality that investigators now believed had been carefully manipulated around him. A marriage already fractured in secret, a friendship built on deception, a pastor who preached loyalty while betraying him behind closed doors. But perhaps the most disturbing part wasn't the affair. It was how ordinary everything still appeared from the outside. Sunday services continued, smiles continued, prayers continued, even as suspicion quietly closed in. And investigators began to realize something terrifying. This may not have been a sudden emotional crime. It may have been the final step in a long process of manipulation that had already been unfolding for years. Because when trust is weaponized, the victim often never sees the danger coming. And Randy Stone may have spent his final years surrounded by betrayal without ever recognizing it. Now, investigators weren't just trying to solve a murder. They were trying to understand how faith, friendship, and power had become entangled in something deadly. By now, the investigation had changed completely. What began as a possible robbery case had transformed into something far more personal and far more disturbing. Detectives were no longer searching for an unknown suspect. They were examining the private lives of the people Randy Stone trusted most. And with every interview, the cracks began to widen. Investigators started noticing inconsistencies, small details that didn't align, timelines that shifted, explanations that felt rehearsed, nothing dramatic, just enough to create doubt. And once suspicion entered the room, every conversation began to sound different. Every pause became noticeable, every silence became meaningful. Meanwhile, David Love continued presenting himself as he always had, calm, controlled, confident. To the church community, he was still their pastor, still their spiritual leader, still the man people trusted to guide them through pain and tragedy. But outside the church walls, detectives were beginning to see another version of him emerge. Not the preacher behind the pulpit, but the man was hidden behind it. As rumors spread through Independence, Missouri, shock turned into disbelief. Many church members refused to accept what investigators were implying. A pastor involved in murder? It sounded impossible. But evidence doesn't care about reputation. And detectives now believed the affair and Randy Stone's death were no longer separate stories. They were connected. The pressure intensified. Questions became sharper. Timelines became tighter. And the walls surrounding the secret affair slowly began collapsing inward. For years, David Love had controlled the image people saw. A trusted pastor, a loyal friend, a man of faith. But investigators were beginning to uncover something far darker beneath that image. A pattern of deception, manipulation, and betrayal hidden behind authority. And as the investigation closed in, one terrifying possibility became impossible to ignore. What if Randy Stone's murder had never been impulsive at all? What if it had been quietly moving toward him for years, while he sat only a few feet away from the people responsible? By the time the investigation reached its final stages, the image Pastor David Love had spent years building was beginning to collapse. Not just inside the courtroom, but inside the minds of the people who once trusted him completely. For the congregation of New Hope Baptist Church, the allegations felt almost impossible to process. This wasn't just a suspect, this was their pastor, a man who baptized children, led prayers, comforted grieving families, and now, he stood at the center of a murder investigation. As details became public, the betrayal only grew darker, the affair, the letters, the financial motive. Everything investigators uncovered painted a picture of deception hidden beneath years of trust. Then came the moment that changed everything. David Love pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. For many, the guilty plea confirmed what they had struggled to believe from the very beginning, that a man who once stood behind a pulpit had become part of a conspiracy that ended in death. But even with the confession, there was no sense of victory, because justice can punish a crime, It cannot repair betrayal. Randy Stone had trusted the people closest to him, his wife, his pastor, his friend. And according to investigators, those relationships became the very thing that placed him in danger. The case left behind questions that still lingered long after the courtroom emptied. Did Randy ever suspect the truth? Did he ever notice the distance growing around him? Or did he spend his final years believing his life was exactly what it appeared to be? In the end, David Love traded his pulpit for a prison cell. The man once trusted to lead others toward salvation became permanently tied to a story of manipulation, greed, and murder. But perhaps the most haunting part of this case is how ordinary it all looked from the outside. A respected church, a trusted pastor, a loyal marriage, until investigators uncovered the truth hidden beneath it all. And by then, Randy Stone was already gone. Long after the headlines faded, long after the courtroom emptied, and long after the prison doors closed behind David Love, the shadow left behind by this case never truly disappeared. Some crimes disturb people because of what happened, but others disturb people for what they reveal. This case revealed how betrayal can survive for years when it hides behind trust. No trust between strangers, but trust between the people closest to us, a husband and wife, a friend and confidant, a pastor and his congregation. Randy Stone trusted the people closest to him, a wife, a friend, a pastor. And all three roles became part of the same deception. That is what continues to haunt this story. Not just the murder itself, but the realization that the danger never looked dangerous. It looked familiar, comforting, safe. For years, David Love stood before people as a spiritual guide, a man trusted with private fears, marriages, confessions, and emotional vulnerability. And according to investigators, that trust became a weapon. Cases like this force people to confront an uncomfortable truth. Sometimes manipulation doesn't arrive through fear. Sometimes it arrives through reassurance, through kindness, through authority, through the people we are taught never to question. And perhaps that is why the murder of Randy Stone still disturbs people today. Because deep down, everyone wants to believe they would recognize betrayal before it destroys them. But this case suggests something far more terrifying. Sometimes betrayal can sit beside you for years without ever revealing its true face. In the end, this case wasn't just about murder. It was about the terrifying power of betrayal hidden behind faith. Because sometimes, the most dangerous monsters don't hide in darkness. They stand behind pulpits. If this story stayed with you, subscribe to Shadow Case Files for more true crime documentaries uncovering the darkest truths hidden beneath ordinary lives. Because every case leaves a shadow, and every mystery deserves a voice. This is Shadow Case Files.